Hey guys, it's Makeshift, and today I'm going to show you how to make 3D hair curls for your plushies. In a previous video I patterned this hair piece here as a two-dimensional object, and I went ahead and made it. I added some dimension with quilt batting and top stitching. I wasn't really happy with it, even though it does look just like this piece here. It just looks a little flat, even though I went ahead and added some detail here with the top stitching to make it look more than just a flat 2D piece. Still wasn't really meeting my standards. So what I decided to do was, instead of making this entirely 2D, I decided to flip out this bottom feather hair piece right here and make it 3D. So if you look on this piece, it's got this 3D curl right here, even though it is still one solid piece. So this isn't two pieces sewn together. This is just this pattern piece altered a bit. But it's just one pattern piece sewn together to make it look 3D. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to pattern that. So you're going to start with just your 2D piece like this, and then you're going to alter it to add some dimension here for this curl, or whatever curl you want. And I decided not to make this top one curled because this character, it lays flat on their head, this hair piece, but like I said before, the original piece was a little too flat. So I didn't want to do two curls because it would add a little bit of bulk. So if you look from the side, I didn't want too much more bulk up the top here. I wanted it to lay flat on her head, but come out a bit at the sides. So I'm just going to add the 3D curl here to the bottom. So to show you how to pattern something like this, start with your normal pattern piece, and then go ahead and trace it up to the point where you want the 3D curl to begin. And what I've done here is cut out the shape of the curl here, and I cut where the seam allowance would be, but it doesn't really matter as long as you pay attention to whether you included seam allowance or not. What I'm going to do is start drawing where this top curl would land underneath it. So I'm going to flip this back and kind of complete this circle here that's being made with the back of the piece and this front curl. And now I've got this bottom curl that I need to make 3D. So I need some room here because I do need to sew this entire curl, but if I just leave it like this, then it's conflicting with your top curl. So you just slide it down a little bit and then start checking to see if where your seam would be is going to conflict with this seam here. So right here, it's still too close. It's just going to line up right with this top seam. So I need to keep going down because I need some room to get in there with my scissors and to cut around the seam. So that should be about good here, where you can see this is the seam for the top curl, and this is going to be the seam for the bottom curl. And I'm going to have enough room to come in here with my scissors and snip in here. So I'm going to finish this up by sliding it down again, lining up that seam. And now I'm going to come to the side here and trace this up around. And these are my seam allowances here that are going to meet. But now I need to add this little long piece here, not the circle, but I need to draw in this long piece. One thing you need to make sure of is that you're gonna leave enough room to turn this piece out. So if you make this little transition here too narrow, you're not gonna be able to flip it right side out. So I'm just gonna draw in where my seam is gonna be. Looking at this piece again, you've got this shape here that I'm trying to draw, this V shape, and then just sketching out the rest of it. So it's not gonna perfectly line up, and that's okay. You can make further adjustments later if you need to. But if you think about when you take this flat piece and move it up, it's gonna become smaller at the end. So you see this piece lines up exactly with my original 2D pattern once you curl up the piece. So usually I always cut out my pieces including seam allowance. With this one, this is probably one that you want to go ahead and trace with your stitch line instead of your seam allowance, just because it's really important for you to get this line here correct. If you only trace this and don't mark where you're supposed to stitch, it's going to be probably pretty confusing where you're supposed to be sewing once you've got this piece under your foot. I already made a piece to make that previous, so you can see here that once I fold this, it lines up with my original piece exactly. So you're basically just making a little dart here, and I like the extra dimension that folding it gives here. You could add a little dart here if that bothers you, but that helps it make it more 3D overall, I think. So I don't really have an issue with there being a little bit of extra fabric in this area, but you can certainly add a little dart here if that's not something you want. So since I've got my pattern here, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out of fabric and sew it all up. Okay, got my piece sewn up here. You can see how I've got this particular seam line sewn in here. I'm also adding dimension using my quilt batting, and I'll also be doing some top stitching. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim this to the seam now. I'm going to make sure to get right into these corners so that I get a nice turn on them, and I'm going to turn it right side out. Okay, I've gone ahead and sewn up my piece. I've added thickness to this piece using quilt batting. I've also done top stitching to define this top feather so that it's not just plain. It still looks like it's its own feather despite us not doing this 3D technique on it. So now all I have to do is to hand stitch this bottom feather into place. So you're just gonna fold up this piece to the top where the little gap is. So just like this. And now you're gonna hand sew it. So you want to hand sew it in a way where you're not going to get rid of all the dimension that you just went through the trouble of adding. So you're gonna hand stitch onto the back of the piece. So I'll go ahead and start a little stitch here. So then I'm just gonna hold it into place. And stitch onto your top feather. And I'm just doing kind of a ladder stitch here. You don't want to do a stitching through the piece, you just want to stitch the two sides together. You don't have to go too far around the piece unless you have a really large unwieldy piece. I'm only covering a very small distance here, but going back and forth a few times just so add some strength to it. Alright, so you can see here how it stays in place now. Got that nice 3D look to it from the side. So now I just gotta tie this off. And that's it. I think it looks great. It has a lot more interest to it other than just having a flat 2D piece like I had originally planned for. Looks really nice. So here you can see the finished product of the 3D curl. It's got a really nice shape going on here with the side hair feather. Like I said, I decided to keep this one flat to keep this flush against her head, and then have this little piece curl out here to give it a bit more interest. So if you view it from that angle, you can see how it pops out pretty nicely there. And from the front view, got a nice shape. And the other side. So, looks great. Hope you guys learned something today. If you use this technique, I'd love to see what you make with it. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.